Good morning. Thank you for joining us for an inspiring conversation about cultural understandings of motherhood. My name is Evalena Matlock-Corley, and I am your moderator this morning. I am a Laurier alumna, and I own a private mental health therapy practice in Waterloo, Matlock Corley Community Solutions. As we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that Wilfrid Laurier's campuses are located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. In alignment with Laurier's strategic plan, the Inspiring Conversation series seeks to elevate a range of perspectives and ideas, including those of our Indigenous colleagues. The sharing of knowledge is powerful and a foundational step toward reconciliation. We are grateful to share this space where we can hear, speak, and learn from one another. In a few moments, we will hear from our panelists about their research and experiences of motherhood. Then we will open up our conversation to the audience. Feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box as we go, and at the end, I will pose the questions to our panelists. To begin the conversation, I would like to introduce our speakers today, Laura MacGregor and Selda Sezen. Laura MacGregor is a writer, researcher, ethicist, hiker, and knitter. She holds a PhD in human relations and an MA in Christian studies from Martin Luther University College, as well as master's and undergraduate degrees in health sciences. Laura's scholarly research and writing focused on the intersection of spirituality. I'm sorry, I got lost here for just a second. Laura's scholarly research and focused on the intersection of spirituality, disability, and caregiving, with a particular emphasis on the lived experiences of mothers raising children with disabilities. Her work emerged from her life parenting a son with profound physical and intellectual disabilities. These days, Laura volunteers with the Island Walk, the Grand Valley Trails Association, and Canadian Nonfiction Collective, while also writing a memoir about completing the 700-kilometer Island Walk as a way of processing her young son's death. Selda Sezen is a Laurier's multi-faith support coordinator, as well as an adjunct faculty member at Martin Luther University College. She specializes in family and child therapy, spirituality, integrated psychotherapy, parenting, and Muslim counseling studies. Selda's research focuses on immigrant Muslim mothers' experiences of parenting in Canada, as well as the impact of the Muslim faith on immigrant Muslim mothers' parenting practices. She is completing her PhD in human relationships in the field of spiritual care and psychotherapy at Martin Luther University College, having previously completed 3 master's degrees. Thank you both for sharing time with us this morning. Now I will turn the floor over to Laura.
Good morning. Thanks so much for including me. I'm excited to be here and part of this inspiring conversation. I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about my research journey with you. So just to start, I'd like to share a little bit about my story. And this story does 2 things. It locates me with respect to the questions I was asking. It tells you a little bit about me, but it also gives you a bit of the foundation of the project I chose to do. I spent 21 years parenting a medically fragile and profoundly disabled child, which means that I spent a fair bit of time engaging with the medical community. And I spent a lot of time talking to physicians. And one particular story stands out as being the precipitant of this project. I was chatting with a physician and I was advocating for some better pain control for my son. I was pretty confident Matthew was in pain. I wasn't sure what the pain was. It could have been spasticity, it could have been a contracted, dislocated hip, could have been a number of things. And Matthew couldn't speak, so he couldn't tell me what was going on, but I was pretty sure something was going on. And the physician was really reluctant to prescribe pain medication. And I was arguing that Tylenol really wasn't doing a very good job anymore. His point was that if he didn't understand the pain, he was really uncomfortable treating the pain with a stronger medication. And while I agreed that we should do some due diligence and really get to the bottom of what was going on, I did push back a little bit. And I said, I'm not convinced that our inability to understand what's going on really should mean my son suffers. The physician was not very happy with me. I had become a difficult mother. And on his way out of the room, he handed me a prescription for a narcotic and said, well, maybe by giving your son this, I'm going to calm you down. I was a little frustrated by the conversation, A, because I didn't think I was all that out of control, but also because he didn't seem to be taking my concerns particularly seriously. But he also said something really interesting. And this idea of by treating my son's body, he could impact my body. By treating Matthew, he was somehow calming me down. I thought was sort of an interesting idea. It really challenged this, what we call Cartesian sense of bodies, where my body and Matthew's body were completely separate bodies, and suggested that maybe there was some overlapping or exchange of experience. I became really interested in this idea and decided to spend some time studying it. So, briefly, I ended up doing what's called a qualitative project, which really means that I spent time listening to mothers' stories. And in particular, I hung out with and listened to the stories of mothers who are parenting a child with a significant intellectual disability, but who also had communication challenges. So the child might not be able to speak. Many were non-speaking, but in some cases, the child could speak, but in such a way that really, unless you knew the child and knew their communication style, you might not be able to understand. So the example I often give is a child comes into the room and repeatedly says, bad day, bad day, bad day. And that could mean anything from, I'm really frustrated because we're out of my favorite cookies, or I'm very ill and I need some kind of medical intervention. And really, the primary caregiver, someone who knows the child, is going to be best able to interpret that communication. I took these stories and I had them translated to text. We typed them verbatim. They were sanitized, which means I removed all the identifying features. So all names are changed. The mother's names are names from my favorite books as a girl. And the children's names are androgynous names from characters of my son's favorite Disney films. And then I used the verbatim, the word by word quotes to study and come up with some general conclusions. And for the purposes of today's little discussion, I'm just going to share some quotes and then talk a little bit about some of the meanings I've pulled from these quotes. So the first one, Anne, mother of Winnie. She said, I knew for a long time that my child had a developmental delay, and I fought them, the health professionals, tooth and nail. They were trying to tell me it's just Winnie's hearing or it's the ear tubes or they weren't worried. I went through this for probably 9 or 10 months of being persistent. And eventually, Winnie was diagnosed with a significant form of autism. Mary, mother of Blaze, told a similar story. When Blaze was 9, they were diagnosed with a severe neurological condition, but we already knew something was going on. We took Blaze to these doctors and places, and they missed it. And it was when a physician I knew, a friend of mine, knew that something was wrong and knew it was neurological. So this family friend paged a pediatrician and said, we just had dinner with our friends and their child. There are these symptoms. Something is very wrong. And the physician said, yes, it sounds like a neurological condition to me. And again, I've removed the name of the neurological condition just to protect their privacy. And by this point, we've seen 5 doctors who had missed it all. Ultimately, the child was diagnosed with a very severe neurological condition. Sue, mother of Nala, had another story that was unfortunately similar. I went into our doctor's office and asked for a specific blood test, and I left without a family physician. He said, I think you might be happier if you found a different family doctor. And I said, are you firing me? And he said, well, I think your needs are too complex for this practice. And I was furious, absolutely furious. And then a few months later, my child had a brain bleed. And I'm going to share one more story with you. And this is Ramona, mother of Fawn. I remember taking Fawn to the hospital a couple of times, and I knew that they were getting sick. And I remember some new doctors, and they would say, no, there's nothing wrong with Fawn. We can't do anything because there's nothing here. Nothing was showing up on their tests. And sure enough, we'd go home, and within 6 to 12 hours, we'd be back again. And by then, the signs were very obvious. So to me, there were a couple of themes that really jumped out at me. The two big ones were first, who gets to define knowledge and who holds knowledge? The medical model has a very particular view of knowledge, all supported by the scientific method and peer-reviewed literature. And so physicians are understandably going to define knowledge as information that falls within those particular parameters. And only very specific people with very specific training then hold this form of knowledge. And I would argue that some of the patriarchal roots of the medical model then ultimately diminish some of the women's voices, mothers' voices, with regard to this entire conversation. I'm going to stop there for a moment and say, at no point am I or any of the mothers in this study saying that we should toss the scientific method or the medical model out with the baby in the bathwater. That's not at all the case. We all value the medical model. It's what makes a huge difference in the lives and care of our children. Ultimately, what most of the mothers were arguing, and what I would also argue, is that there is a place for the kind of knowledge that women and mothers held about their children, particularly children they were caring for full time, and understood in ways that someone who doesn't care for their child to the same extent might understand or might not understand. The other thing that I thought was really fascinating is this idea of boundaries around bodies. Descartes and the Cartesian understanding of the body would argue that there's my body and my son's body, or there's the mother's body and the child's body, and they're completely separate. They're completely different. And here we're seeing that actually maybe deeply interconnected bodies, bodies that spend a lot of time together and learn to understand each other, may have some overlapping experiences. So that mother's spidey sense that I talk about, their ability to understand complex and or subtle changes in their child's body. And that this is really powerful knowledge, and maybe we should use it. So I'm going to conclude with just two quick quotes. First, mothers of chronically ill children often know when their children are becoming seriously ill, and it becomes obvious to them before medical providers. Even parents who don't have medical training often have this very intimate understanding of their child's symptoms and reactions. And that really, this information, this knowledge shouldn't be ignored if we want to offer optimal care. And really, as I just said, mothers aren't challenging the authority of the biomedical model, not at all, in fact. Rather, they're denying the exclusivity of it. They're saying, wait a second, there's a space for the knowledge I hold, and that using this knowledge can ultimately provide better care for my child. There are some limits to this study. The two big ones I'll mention are that it was pretty small, and it really focused on a pretty homogenous group of women. And so really we would need to do more work. We would need to study larger communities and more diverse communities to really understand what's going on and how we might be able to include this women's knowledge, mother's knowledge in these conversations around care of their children. But ultimately, what mothers most wanted was simply to be heard by the people who are caring for their children, and most importantly, trusted. They wanted to go into relationships with health providers where the starting point was trust and not distrust. Rather than having to have their trust earned, they wanted that to be the foundation of the relationship. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my study, to share a little bit about these stories and the stories of these women. And I'm grateful to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was very interesting. Now we will hear from Selda.
Hello, everyone. Laura, thank you very much for a lovely introduction of your research and the insights. And I'm excited also to be sharing about my research project with you, an ongoing research project. It's about to be completed soon. So I'm just writing the conclusion part. So I will be very happy to be finishing up soon. And thanks for reminding me over here. And I'm so excited to start. So let me share my slides first over here. And my research is on the experience of Mr. Mother's parenting in Canada. And I would like to give you a little bit of research gap information that that is the reason actually I found myself into this research. So in the field of psychotherapy, mental health, and social work, and good news that there is an increasing number of professionals engaging with Muslim families, particularly focusing on mothers who are playing a central role in the well-being of diverse families. And while many researchers have, explored various aspects of Muslim immigrant women's experience in Canada, including, their rights, including their adaptation settlement, including their well and dress code, and marriage, divorce, honor killing, pregnancy, or legal issues. And there has been a lack of attention to the unique aspect of Muslim motherhood. So considering the elevated status of mothers in Islam, diversity in Islam and diversity within the Muslim motherhood in pluralistic societies, and lack of studies on Muslim parenting practices brought my attention to this subject. And my research happened to focus on identifying immigrant Muslim mothers' parenting practices in Canada. And I believe that it's filling a critical gap in the literature and provide cultural and spiritual insight for many psychotherapists, spiritual care providers, social workers, and mental health practitioners. So if I would like to highlight the aim of the study, I can say that the study enhanced the cultural competence and cultural understanding of diverse structures and dynamics. And it promotes therapeutic approaches and culturally sensitive treatment outcomes after considering all those like challenges, barriers, or stresses, or the growth areas of the families and Muslim mothers' practices. And also it empowers Muslim mothers and support the Muslim families to promote diversity and inclusion, as well as advocate the social justice. I believe that it combats stigma and stereotypes and promote the social inclusion and the diverse Canadian society. And I believe that it informs and develops culturally and spiritually sensitive policymaking process and practices. So, and last but not least, facilitate cross-cultural dialogue and collaboration between researchers and field studies. The methodology of the research, if I would speak, it is a qualitative phenomenological research. And I interviewed 12 immigrant Muslim mothers, I conducted an hour confidential face-to-face semi-structured interviews with them. And the data I gathered from this interviews thematically analyzed to identify some primary and secondary themes, which is the following slide is focusing on them. Findings and the thematic analysis. In that thematic analysis of the data, allowed me to categorize these research findings into two main underlying themes and the following sub-theme categories. Based on my analysis, the first underlying theme was the influence of cultural values and practices on Muslim women's mothering experience. And in this area, I can say that all the participants were coming from Muslim family households, and coming from Muslim countries, majority Muslim countries, and I was able to identify those secondary themes under this theme. And I would like to actually go through quickly over those with you and just to have a better understanding of the Muslim mothers' parenting experience in Canada. And the first one was the culture and family environment, which was, a very impactful for women. Actually, they have been raised in a Muslim household, and their early exposure to the cultural and spiritual customs, values, and practices in their origin of culture. And the second one is the Islamic teaching. So in this area, I noticed that there was a great impact of the participants' faith tradition in their parenting practices. And the third one is also related with that. So being a good role model came out as a secondary theme because they have been speaking highly about the importance of being a good role model for their children, being pious, being good Muslim, as important and equal to be a good mother for them. So that was very also interesting finding to identify over here. And the raising a faithful child was another area that identified in all those women that I interviewed. And they had they had great passion in raising faithful children and the generations. By the way, let me turn off my Ezan over here. I don't know if you were hearing. I apologize for that. It is a prayer time, and it's just a call for prayer, which is also a kind of an example that like how in the household or the family environment, the Muslim mothers or Muslim families have been trying to leave some traditions with their children or in their home. So kind of this is that electronic call for prayer is kind of a practice that we do at home. So. And a role of fathers was also very, very important findings of this subject that the Muslim mothers were highly speaking about the influence of their father's role at home and their husband's role also in terms of shaping and informing their identity, woman identity, and their identity as mother. And also the research talk about the parenting styles of mothers, that how it has been influencing their parenting. So the second underlying finding was the influence of Canadian society of women mothering experiences. And I had two secondary, themes identified. The first one was acculturation experience and post-migratory challenges. The second one is the resources, individual resources and family and societal resources for Muslim women. And under the acculturation experience and post-migratory challenges, and I identified some of their other common themes. One was the minority status of the woman. So they were all coming from predominantly like Muslim or ethnically, culturally, linguistically dominant, cultures. And then when they come to Canada as an immigrant mother, and they started experiencing the minority status, right? So, and they talk highly about that. And the second one is the influence of individualistic culture. So all the participants were coming from collectivist culture. So they were born and raised in the collectivist culture, and also considering like women's status in the home countries, they have been coming. So they were all supported by the collectivist cultural or collectivist family members over here. So when an immigrant family comes to Canada as um, a Muslim family over here by themselves. So it is a drastic change in their life. So then they have been speaking heavily about this influence and some social factors, including some, financial changes, status changes, including, their occupational like status change. And they were talking about language, like how they have been, even if they had, high education back home, so when they come over here, so they are becoming an illiterate person over a travel, over a ticket, after a ticket. So, that they talk about highly the impact, how it stressed them, how it impacted their parenting practices here, and it changed, how it changed actually their identity as a woman and mother over here. So, and diverse Canadian society also is something that they have been experiencing, because religious diversity and cultural diversity was something that they have to be, prepared. And those drastic changes in these areas also definitely informing and shaping and affecting their parenting. And the last team was under the acculturation experience and post-migratory challenges is the Islamophobia. And as you know that if the Muslim women and mothers were like especially if they were a visible minority and practicing Muslim, so the impact was more stronger than when you compare the Muslim women who were not practicing, for example, headscarf, or just they have been more more um, 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 hesitant to leave their Muslim identity in the society, right? So, and unfortunately, when it comes to Islamophobia, so it's just so hard to speak that. So it has been really affecting their, identity and their, coexisting in Canada, especially, after all those, terrorist attacks and those, anti-Muslim sentiments through the media or through the, unfortunate incidents happening last couple of years in Canada. It has been so alarming and so concerning for Muslims and Muslim families. And they try to do, I think, their best to protect their children, but at the same time to preserve and to leave their identity as Muslims. So, of course, the research was not always, talking about the, negative part of negative, experiences of mother. And I'm happy to share that in terms of the resources part, that like the many participants actually found that individual resources, person-oriented resources were, very plenty. So, but of course, they all needed some adjustments, the unique adjustments for Muslim population or for Muslim mother, and also family and societal researchers resources. In some way, actually, they have been plenty. They have been very diverse. But on the other side, so they also needed some improvement in terms of removing the barriers for the individuals and families to reach out these resources, and also to have an access to those resources and to be informed about those resources. So that's all of my findings of my research. If I would like to conclude my speak with the kind of the outcome expectations and also the importance of this research. And I can say that the journey of Muslim immigrant mothers in Canada is one of the resilience, adaptation, integration, and growth. And I believe that their experiences highlight the importance of cultural understanding and the value of a supportive, inclusive society. And understanding the nuanced ways in which faith and cultural identity inform parenting practices is essential for providing effective support for children and families. And this research study not only enriches our understanding of the specific experiences of immigrant Muslim mothers in Canada, but also serves as a call for the integration of cultural competence and sensitivity into our mental health, social work, and psychotherapy, and spiritual care practices. And I believe that it also urges to advocate for policies and practices that respect and accommodate diverse parenting traditions, and to work towards eliminating barriers to mental health and social services for immigrant and minority communities. Thank you so much for inviting me to share my research findings and analysis. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I will pass it to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Selda. That was so very interesting. Laura is going to come back on screen now, and we're going to take some questions for you ladies. The first question I have to ask to both of you is, I know that narrative telling of stories is so powerfully impactful to everyone. How did the mothers that you talked to deal with that? What was their response to you coming and finally asking the question that they've been wanting to tell someone about? Either of you can answer. Both of you can answer.
Do you want to go first, Selda?
You go, please.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's such an important question. Certainly the mothers I was spending time with were coming from communities or environments. And while I was hearing mostly stories about the medical community, the educational community also did come up. So they were often navigating these communities, these environments where they felt that their stories, their experience, and their knowledge were being either outright ignored or were not being valued. And so all of a sudden, here is this researcher who wants to spend time listening to their stories. And my experience with the mothers was that they were grateful that someone finally stopped and said, I value your story. I value your experience. I value your knowledge. I want you to inform this project. And that ultimately their stories were the project. And one of the things that I did as part of establishing trustworthiness is at the conclusion of the study, after I spent time studying the results, I then turned around and went back to them and said, so this is what I heard you say. Did I get it? So not only was I taking the time to listen to their story, but I then turned around and said, please tell me if I got it right. And if I didn't, would you please take the time to ensure I am getting it right? And for many of the women, they sadly weren't spending time in communities where that was happening. And so I think they enjoyed the opportunity to share their story. I certainly learned a great deal listening to the stories, and to create this space where their experiences were amplified and valued.
Thank you.
I will be echoing Laura in many ways, that Muslim women, when they were approached for a study about them, about their motherhood experience, and especially its was an area that actually they have been feeling so alone and left alone. And so because, traditionally and culturally, like raising children were under the, just put the shoulders of mothers. I mean, so, and the culturally, Muslim men were not very involved into, into the daily chores of raising children. So, and the study also like highlighted well in terms of the role of those, fathers and like those changing, I mean, dynamics or expectations of the Muslim mothers from their husband. So it's not the same that they have been actually raised by their fathers and then or the relationship with a father and mother they have exposed or they were raised in. So it has been very, I think, important for them. Someone was asking about their experience over here, and especially when they feel quite enabled here. So in terms of, many resources, in terms of like disconnection with their largest, community members, including their, parents and their like close family members and trusted people, to raise their children together. So, and we had very tearful moments. And I mean, our sessions, interview sessions, turned into a kind of like therapy sessions with them somehow. And it has been very touching, of course. And I had to stop the recordings and we had to, like take some tea break or just, debrief some, then go back to the, their experiences. And, the people were grieving, and even actually they raised their children. They have been, now grown up and even married, their children, but remembering those moments that how they have been, struggling as a mother by themselves, feeling lack of resources around them, or and there's no resources around them, or when they have been, feeling that they don't know if they're doing right or wrong, and or what is available for them, etc. So, and or nobody, I mean, to speak to them, or feeling that in terms of practicing their culture is kind of imposed that, oh, something is wrong with you, this is not the common practice over here, so we do. So kind of they have been all wronged, like what they have been doing, or just they have been all criticized and judged in terms of their parenting. So when they remember when they were asked and checked all those moments and challenges, of course, our interviews were a bit of turning an emotional moments. But other than that, and I see that actually they all appreciated this approach, and they all appreciated those this research actually happening about them. And then they were all wishing that actually this is going to shed some light on some barriers and challenges on mothering experiences of women. So I hope they will pray will come through, hoping and excited to conclude my study for all.
All right, thank you so much. I'm sure that both groups of participants found your work absolutely therapeutic, because sometimes as moms we're like, we just need to get this out, right? The next question is for Laura. It's how do you make your intuitions about your kid how do you make your intuitions about your kid to physicians when they kind of ignore what you say? So I guess they're asking, how do you do that thing like, I'm a mom, I know this, but they're not actually paying attention to you?
Yeah. I wish I had a great answer to that question. I'm not sure I do. I think the unfortunate truth is we navigate environments where the expertise and knowledge we carry is simply not valued or not appreciated, and sometimes not even not seen at all. I think what I would say to any mother who is going into a healthcare environment and feels that their expertise is not being heard and appreciated, I think part of it is just playing the broken record and just continuing to advocate diplomatically but assertively on behalf of your child. Um, as much as possible, learn the nuances of the environment, learn the lingo, and speak to them. They'll hear you if you're able to do that. I struggle with the idea that we have to play their game to be heard, but it is unfortunately true. And I think a lot of it is more continued education with healthcare providers in terms of the role of women's knowledge and expertise or primary caregivers. My research focused primarily on mothers and women, but there's definite research that suggests that any closely connected caregiver, and that would include men who are active and involved caregivers, um, have a very profound understanding of the individual for whom they're caring. And we need to continue to educate healthcare providers or other care providers that this knowledge is valuable and they dismiss it at their peril, that they dismiss it at the cost of good care. So unfortunately, how to get doctors to listen, I'm not sure I have a great answer other than to continue to persist. Um, and to remind them as a primary caregiver, you are your child's not only advocate, best advocate, but you are the best expert in the room, regardless of whatever letters come after your name. You are the best, most knowledgeable expert when it comes to your child. So to continue to have faith in your knowledge and to speak to that knowledge.
Absolutely. Thank you. Selda, this next question is for you. What are some examples of religious accommodations for Muslim mothers that we can be aware of as non-Muslims that may have been brought up in your study?
I mean, I had very, different answers, from others to answer that question in my interview session. So, and I noticed that actually they're also, we're talking about the diverse Muslim communities. So it is just so hard just to kind of list certain things that will fit to everyone. So because we do have very diverse Muslim community in front of us and practicing Islam and identifying themselves as Muslim, and but they have their very own way of culturally, ethnically, very own way of practices. So and their needs and also varying according to their also social locations or their identity. So I mean the intersection of their identities, right, in addition to their motherhood. So but if I would just say, just the first thing actually comes to my mind for their children, and they have been so, I think, had some negative experiences in the school system, for example. So, and they really need someone or some way that the school will respect the families practices or their understanding of motherhood and parenting. I mean, so in terms of the religious accommodations, for example. So, and their children, like for example, celebrating certain certain Eids, like celebrations, cultural celebrations with the school. So having some responses. So, and I have heard actually one of the parent was saying that, I've never heard my son coming to home that his teacher celebrated his Eid, hey, happy Eid, or just Eid Mubarak, or said something just to recognize this person's big day or important day, and etc. So I think communication between school board and the parents and or Mr. Mothers. I don't know if they are, interested in more into taking initiative. So that will be something, for example, help them in terms of, religious accommodation. I mean, it may not be the religious accommodation, but acknowledging, like religiously acknowledges, spiritually acknowledging their existence. And this is a big support and big relief for parents that their children were respected and their identity were respected, right? So, other than that, I was, one of them, for example, the participants were saying that they were invited to school to have a teacher nights or events on the, first day of very important day, the religious day. So, and of course they couldn't join, and they said actually the half of the school population were Muslim, and so the parents actually did not involve to the event, which was, specifically, organized for them. So the school were complaining to them. So they're not coming, they're not involving in their children's school. So, but you're not, accommodating this or honoring their important religious day, the first day of Eid, in your calendar, or when you are scheduling your event for a population, for parents. And so this is kind of, came out that it shows that, like there are a lot of, bits and pieces in the daily life, every IT organization, institutions, or every service providers, can work on and have some, some awareness, because it comes to the point that actually it becomes an, equity and inclusion, concern. So it's not just becoming a religious accommodation, or just, religiously acknowledging, being aware, or just being sensitive. It becomes actually an issue of EDI, right? So like how are we, offering those sources options for the, just the people who need accommodation, and are there any system actually accommodating them? So like, do they have to ask always to, just to be accommodated, right? So these are all the things. If they're not in place, it puts you into a situation that you have to ask. You're a minority. Of course, we don't have, room for you. So you're going to make room in it. So like, you have to try, you have to tell us, you have to, make an effort. So, but how about the people actually going through a lot of, mental issues, or just, burnout, and, or, they are grieving. So they may not have energy, they may not have capacity, they may not have a healthy, being, just to advocate for their rights, or just advocate for those accommodations, etc. So that's why I think many women have been so sensitive when it comes to about their parenting. So they have been all shut down. They have been all so quiet, and for a long time here, they didn't have a voice. They didn't have people actually to hear them. So I think there's a lot to do, so, but I don't know where to start. So I think this kind of researches will be a good start to look into, and have as a foundation, foundational work to build on up, right?
Absolutely. And I totally agree that having the celebration in school with children would be so helpful, because then you're teaching the children about different cultures. And so they grow up knowing that this is just a part of being in the world. I really like that idea. The next question is for both of you. It says, thank you two for very interesting talk. I'm curious about how you feel the research community responds to qualitative and narrative-based work. It seems to me that some of the pattern of women's parenting or mothering experiences being ignored in some spaces is a symptom of a larger societal process of focusing on rational or science-based findings exclusively.
We could talk for a long time about that question. That's a great question. I guess my short answer would be absolutely. Certainly, I have navigated many environments that told me that both research into the experiences of women and mothers, and particularly using qualitative methods, lacked gravitas, lacked rigor. I would push back at both of those stridently. But ultimately, it really speaks to who holds the power. The fundamental question that I was grappling with through my research project is who defines knowledge? Who gets to decide what knowledge is, and therefore who holds it? And for communities who are invested in a particular form of knowledge, so through scientific method and peer-reviewed studies, when they define knowledge exclusively using these parameters, it effectively removes certain knowledge keepers from the conversation. And I would argue that this is a form of epistemic injustice, and it requires much more robust dialogue about the entire topic. But I think the short answer is this is a significant problem. Certainly, I have been on the receiving end of those that feedback, particularly within medical communities, where I would argue that even the language they used, the words they used, were power laden in such a way that minimized certain people's engagement in the conversation. So uh, I could go on for a long time about this. In the sake, I guess, for the sake of brevity, I probably will stop there. But yeah, it's an important question, and I think one that we're going to continue to grapple with, and that we continue to have to push up against, and draw on narrative-based, qualitative-based research to inform the conversation.
Thank you, Laura. In adding what you're saying, that I would like to say that having that qualitative research or narrative-based research does not affect the impact of the academic scientific value of the work. So, and we are in the era that actually even one single case, one single incident or subject can create academic a base for further studies. So, and I believe that maybe our work is like Laura's and my work, or just similar works we have been doing, is kind of like digging with the needle, just maybe one by one work. It's kind of like saving those like starfishes, like who were under the sun, just maybe one by one we are throwing them out, or just talking about them and their experiences over here. So, but I believe that those experiences are so important and so meaningful, even if they may not be overlapping with any other experiences. So just for the sake of that individuals or individuals impact, so they are important and they're worth to look into.
Thank you both so much for your answers. This is our final question that I'm going to ask both of you. As a mother of a child with complex medical needs and also doing PhD research with a focus on grief and bereavement, I am wondering how you navigate your own narrative stance as you do research within a similar field that intersects with your own life. How much of that do you include in your research and writing, or what have you found to be helpful in navigating that? Has it been important for your research participants to know your approach, how you approach the research, and about your own lived experiences?
Do you want to go first, Selda, or shall I? Okay. That's a great question. And I guess I'm not sure who that question came from, but if you need to if you're doing qualitative research and need to talk to someone who's lived through grief and bereavement of a medically fragile child, I can make sure that you get my email, having lived through that experience, and if you need an informant. But yeah, no, I think so there's a lot of questions there, but I think I always located myself with regard to the question. I feel that that is important. I made it known that I was a mother my experience engaging in the research project was that the mothers I was spending time with valued that. There was a sense that I was part of the community, that I therefore understood the story, and that they didn't need to do some of the groundwork in explaining their own story. There was a sense that I got it, and that they could lean into my understanding. I was very careful to only bring in my experience if I felt it served the interview, that this was not a place for my story to be told, but that if my story allowed another woman to share her story, then I would try to judiciously bring it in. It's a dancing act, and I was constantly attentive to that. One of the strategies that I used, and it's something recommended in qualitative research, is to maintain a reflexive journal through the entire research process. So I journaled my experience within an interview. I journaled how anything I might have said might have impacted the interview. I tried to own what I brought to the interview and to be very attentive to that. So making sure that I was continuously aware of and reflecting on my engagement with the topic, with the research question, and with the person with whom I was speaking. Those were the strategies that I tended to employ.
Thank you, Laura. As a Muslim mother who has been, like raising a child in Canada, so I as exactly actually, and I felt I asked that question to myself, that like, where am I going to put myself and my experience and my feelings or my interpretations? So it was also like a part of limitations of my research that I have mentioned in my research. But on the other side, it's kind of enriching part of the research as well. So strength. So like it has two sides, like the one situation putting you into giving you a strength, on the other side actually giving you a weakness. So that was also a very interesting situation to be in. So I was definitely aware of my position, and I was definitely so careful, I mean, about like how I have been, like what I have been hearing. So I think in addition to journaling, Laura mentioned that. So what was helpful for me, that just checking, going back to the participants, the people who I have been doing the interview. So like if, and I interpret it that way, or if they really meant like just they wanted to say this. So like if am I being creative, or taking this out of their saying, or they really meant to like say that. So that going back and forth was so important. And I think this is important as well, like as qualitative research. If I had quantitative research, I wouldn't have that luxury of going back to all the participants, checking back, like, and then engaging with them in terms of those interpretations and findings, right? So as I said, that actually the advantages and disadvantages, just coming with that position. So, but I'm happy that, I had an insider eyes as well, just, kind of was helpful for me to process my parenting. And I mean, that study turned into a kind of, how can I say that? I mean, session for me, and therapy session for me, that, I was a feeling in many ways that, and I wasn't alone, hey, look, this is not only me, of course, I didn't have a chance to, like speak to the, participants that way. So like not to influence their, they respond to the questions. So, but internally, I have been going through a lot when I have been doing those interviews with them. So yes, so it brings some strength, but at the same time, some, limitation to the research. So, but I think this is just a very, the nature of the study, or being in this position.
Thank you both so much. I think that we have two wonderful papers if we want to head to the Laurier Library or Libby.com. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have. Thank everyone who submitted questions. I'm sorry that we could not get to all of them. Laura and Selda, thank you so much for participating. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you everyone for attending and your interest in Laurier research. We will send a link to the recording very soon. Have a great day.